I'm Dean Safola, and this is the Azure Academy. Thanks for joining us again at the Azure Academy, and today we're covering Hybrid Identity Part 2, Azure AD Federation Services. So if you haven't done so already, please do click on the subscribe button and let us know that you are interested in following the Azure Academy and joining the community here. And please leave us a comment below on if this video was a help to you, any questions that you have, or anything that you'd like us to do in the future. So let's go right over to the Azure portal. And in the portal here, we'll go down in the blade to Azure AD Connect. And in our last video, we covered how to deploy Azure AD Connect. And you may have noticed that there was an option in there to set up federation services, which is what we're going to cover today. And when we do, we will see this line item here for federation be enabled with however many domains we enable it for. So now that we're going to build Active Directory federation services, the question is, where should we do it? But there's another component that I'll just mention here, and that is the web application proxy. So ADFS is a server that you would want to protect because of how it handles your identities. Therefore, we have a proxy server that you can put in front of ADFS, which if you're doing that deployment should also be installed on another separate server so that you have a good layer of protection, and ideally you would place the WAP in your DMZ. So I'm standing up a separate box for ADFS along with a public IP address. The reason for this is because ADFS has to be able to respond to requests where they come from on-premise or in my virtual network in Azure or from the internet, and then people can authenticate to the Azure portal or whatever their applications are from wherever they're located. And one more thing before we get started is just the documentation of what we're going to cover. So that'll be under products. And we'll scroll down a little to identity and then to Azure Active Directory. And in the main doc page, we'll scroll down to hybrid identity and we'll click on this see more link. And then over in the sidebar under how to guides, manage federation services, and then manage federation services with Azure AD Connect. And Azure AD Connect will actually help us to deploy ADFS if it is not currently in our environment. And while we're on the subject of prerequisites for ADFS, let me open another tab here. And I'll have this linked in the video description below. And these are the ADFS requirements from our docs page. And I want to specifically call your attention to configuring your database requirements. So as we'll see as we get into this, there are two database options, the Windows internal database as well as a SQL database. And there are details here as to which you should choose for your environment and how to go through and make that decision. So with that, let's jump over to my environment. So we can set up ADFS using our Azure AD Connect tool. So here on the desktop, I've got the icon for that. So I'll run that. And if you don't have that icon on your desktop, underneath the start menu, you will have Azure AD Connect as well, and that'll start the same tool. Now we've already run this in our environment, but we have to still click on configure. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to change the user sign in. So we'll select that and hit next. And we need to enter a username and password that is a Azure AD Global Administrator. So we'll do that and hit next. Now, when we ran through this in our last video, we just selected password hash sync and single sign-on. But here we're going to use one of our federation options. I'll be using ADFS. And notice that when we did this, it changed here, removing single sign-on. And that's because these features are going to be managed by ADFS. And then we get some information here at the bottom. Note in particular that you need an SSL cert in order to complete this process. We'll hit next. And now we need our domain admin credentials, and then we'll hit next. And now the system wants to know, do we want to configure a new ADFS farm or use an existing farm? So I'm going to walk you through the process on a new farm so you can see what it looks like, but we're not going to complete it because we're going to come back and use the existing farm that we're going to build on our other machine. So let's go over and build that first, and we'll come back here. And I've got an RDP session here to the box that will become my federation server. And this box has already been joined to my domain. And then also here's my certs, and I've got my root cert as well as my client side cert and then I've got the PFX file, and then I've already entered those items into my system. So with that, we do need to get ADFS installed on this box. So that would be under Manage here, and we'll add a server role, and we'll click Next and select our particular server. And then right at the top here, we have ADFS, and we'll just check the box for that and hit Next. And there are not any additional features that we need at this point, so we'll hit Next. And just telling us here that we're going to start the ADFS integration with Active Directory, and that this will replace our need for a single sign-on. Click Next, and then we'll hit in the Install button. Now, while this is installing, let's cover a couple more things. So first of all, our certificate was installed into our system, and explicitly I had to add into this a subject alternate name. And I did that for my domain, as you can see here, and for ADFS. And the other thing I wanted to show you is the certificate path, that this is a valid certificate that is okay, and the root certs are all present and accounted for. Also wanted to call out the fact that in my local DNS on my domain controller, I have added an entry here for ADFS. So I could just call that directly. And I have also added something similar where I have my domain registrar. So in my case, I'm registered at a particular hosting provider, but I've got the records there pointing to Azure DNS. So let's take a look over at that real quick. And as you can see, I've got most of the bottom blurred out where all my records are. And so we'll add a new record for our ADFS server. So we'll hit Add Record Set, and then we need to give it a name. So this is where ADFS will be used, and we'll be adding it as an A record. And now we're going to add it through a alias record set. So we'll select yes for this. And then we'll add it by Azure Resource and selecting the particular subscription where our public IP is located. And we'll hit the drop down and select our ADFS public IP. And then we can set our time to live however long we want here, and then we'll hit OK. And now that we've done that, we can see our ADFS record is here using a public IP and an alias target. Now, the benefit of this is that if you shut down the VM or you're not using a static public IP and the IP changes, your DNS record will be updated automatically. So that's a nice add-on. So let's go back to our ADFS box. Right, and the installation of all the modules that we need here is done. So we'll hit close and then go back up here to the configure federation services. And the prerequisite section here up top, just reminding us that we need to have a domain admin account and a publicly trusted cert for this, which we do. And then we're going to select the create first federation server and hit next. And then if your current user is not a domain admin, you'll have to hit change to put in those credentials. And after you've done that, hit next. And now we need to select our certificates. Now, I've already loaded my certificate into the system, but if you have not, you can click on the import button here and then point it at the PFX file and then load it that way, and it would import it for you. But I've already done that, so I will select my cert. And then when I do, because I have multiple subject alternate names, you have to pick which one you want to use, and this will be for ADFS. And then you can put in your display name here, what you'll get when someone tries to sign in, right? And you could always put in just Azure Academy or whatever the name of your company is. It's just a display name. I'm just going to leave it at this to make it a little more obvious, and we'll hit next. So now we need to set up what kind of service account we want. Service accounts are, by their nature, limited to a single device or system. So you couldn't have a service account spanning multiple systems. So then we came up with the idea of a group managed service account. Now, in order to set this up, you have to set a KDS root key so that they're all basically connected together and can work across multiple systems. So if you'd like to do that, go right ahead. I'm going to instead use an account on a single system since I only have one ADFS server. So I'll hit select here and then I'll add my account credentials. And this will be my ADFS service account that I've created for this. And we'll just provide the password and hit next. And now we get to choose what kind of database setup we want for ADFS. If you just have a single server or you're in a dev environment, you might be okay using the Windows Internal Database. And if you are using a production environment or a larger environment or multiple ADFS servers, then I do recommend that you use a SQL server or specifically a SQL always on availability cluster. So that way you get some scalability and you don't have any limitations on the SQL end of things. In my case, this is just my lab. I will use the Windows internal database and click next. Okay, and then you can review your selections here and then hit next to begin the installation. And in a few seconds, we get our validation here that everything is good to go, and we'll hit configure, and that'll set up ADFS on our system. And we are getting a certificate warning here, and that's because we don't have a subject alternate name for certauth.adfs. That's okay. We don't really need that as a requirement going forward. So we'll just continue here. And that is complete. Server was set up successfully. We'll hit close on that. And you can see we've got ADFS now loaded in our server manager. And underneath our admin tools, it is also present. So we'll open that up. Right, and here is the ADFS console. And if we go under certificates here, we can see that we've got our cert loaded. And everything looks good there. Once we set this up with Azure AD Connect, we will be creating what is called a relying party trust. And this is where ADFS is going to begin to trust other environments or other tools. One other thing to call out here under authentication methods, if we click edit, this is where we can change the different authentication methods that ADFS will use. So these are the default options, and you could turn these on or off. For example, on forms authentication, which I'll turn off, and I'll hit apply. And then if you have other needs for ADFS to use things like the Azure-based MFA or other certificate authentication, you can enable those here as well. So we'll come back to here in a few moments. Let's go back right now to our Azure AD Connect server. Now we're going to again walk through the experience of creating a new farm just so you can see what that process would look like, and then we'll come back and finish it with the existing farm. So first thing is we have to present our certificate. So we'll hit browse and choose our PFX file, and then of course we have to enter our password for that cert, and then we'll click OK, and then choose our subject name, in this case ADFS, and then we'll hit next. And then we need to pick a server that will set up ADFS on. Now, because I've already set it up on the other box, I'm this time going to just use my domain controller. And this is just for demonstration purposes. We're not actually going to complete this. And once it's discovered your system, you can click next. And this is the web app proxy, which we're going to skip in this video and possibly come back to that in another video, and just click next. And now we need our service account for ADFS, so you can choose to create a group managed service account if you've already done your KDS key or an existing one, but I am going to go with the regular domain account, and then I will click next. And we need to finally select which domain we're going to sync here. And once it has validated our domain at the bottom here, we're good to go, and we could click next and configure, but again, we're going to go back a few screens, and then we're going to do this on an existing farm. And you'll see that the experience is relatively similar. So we detect our ADFS server and then click OK and click next. And it's already discovered our domain because that's what's registered in ADFS. All right, so you can see very similar experiences, whether you use Azure AD Connect to deploy your ADFS environment, or if you use an existing ADFS environment, the experiences are generally the same between the two. And then we'll hit next here, and it'll go through some checks, and then we'll be ready to configure. And just like when we set up Azure AD Connect the last time, it will begin a synchronization as soon as this is complete. But note that single sign-on will be disabled when we go through this process, but it's okay. We have another way to enable it, which I'll show you right after this. So let's hit configure. And now that that is all done, we'll click next. And now we have to validate our environment. So we've got two sets of records here. The quadruple A is for IPv6, and then the regular A records are for IPv4. But more importantly than that, the quadruple A record is for our internet verification, and the A record is for our extranet verification. So we'll click verify here. And once we do, we've got a little warning that we do not have IPv6 set up currently, but that's fine. And then we do have our public extranet set up here as well, which has been verified. And of course, I'm masking out my public IP address. We're done at this point. So we'll hit exit here. And if we go back to the Azure portal real quick, and we go under Azure AD Connect in the blade, we can see now that we have federation enabled on one domain. Single sign-on is no longer enabled. And even when we go through the next process here to enable single sign-on through federation, this will still say that it is disabled because Azure AD no longer handles the authentication. So it doesn't know that we have single sign-on enabled. So let's go and take a look at that, as well as some verifications that ADFS is working. We're back on our ADFS server, and we want to look here first at our relying party trusts. And when we do, we see we've got Microsoft Office 365 Identity Platform, and this is corresponding with the login.microsoftonline.com. So this is the indicator that we've actually got connectivity set up between ADFS and Azure AD Connect. And of course, you can add other relying party trusts here if you want to. This would be a good point for me to introduce you to ADFS Help. And this site has a whole bunch of tools on it for doing things around ADFS. And I'll open up another tab on how to do some customizations in your ADFS login interface. So there's several items here for how to customize, and I've got a few of them here in my PowerShell. So if we go to the Azure portal real quick, and we'll put in our credentials, but when we hit next, it'll take us to our organization sign-in page, which is our ADFS server, and then we've got to authenticate here in order to get in. Before I actually complete this, let's go back to our ADFS box and let's run some of these customizations. So we're going to change our login page to be of the company MS Azure Academy, and then we're also going to set a default logo, and that'll be from one that I have on my network, as well as an image, which will take up the left side of the screen, and we'll add a sign-in description. So let's run these lines, and I pulled all of those off of our docs page. And now that we've run that, we'll go back to our private browser, and there we go. We've got our custom image over on the left. We've got our custom sign-in as well as our logo, and then we can finish our sign-in. And then it asks us again, do we want to stay logged in? So we'll hit no here and complete our sign-in. And when we do, we're logged into our Azure portal. Now, the other thing that I mentioned we wanted to look at was single sign-on. So we've come back to our docs page, and again, I'll have this linked in the description so you can get here and review it yourself. And single sign-on, when it comes to ADFS, it's not so much SSO in the same sense as we would have it before with Azure AD Connect, but rather creating a seamless sign-on experience using relying parties as part of ADFS. So there's lots of settings here that you can get into, as well as if we scroll down a little bit, enabling persistent SSO with Office 365 users. It might be of particular interest for you, and you can read this doc to go through all of that info. So let's go back to my environment. And the last thing I'll show you is in our group policies. So I've added to my default domain policy our adfs.msazureacademy.com into our local internet zone. This allows our ADFS server to be treated as if it is internal. And this other one that's here was from our last video talking about enabling SSO. So when you have Azure AD Connect, you need to add this as a group policy in order to have Azure AD respond to your stuff with single sign-on. Now, once we have our ADFS server, this actually will supersede what we have here for Azure Active Directory. So that way we can have a single sign-on solution. So if I go out of here and access something like my Windows Virtual Desktop environment, and I'll sign in again here with Thor, and we'll go to our org sign-in page, and there we go again, presented with ADFS login, even for Windows Virtual Desktop, and we'll sign in. And when we do, we're presented with our WVD client, and we've got just a desktop interface here. So if I run this, then it'll connect over the WVD gateway and ask us to provide our creds. And this is for the local logon. So we provide those and hit submit. And since this is the first time that I'm logging in, it creates my FSLogix profile. So now when I go to the Internet Explorer and we're prompted to log in, and without having to provide creds again on the ADFS sign-in page, we are signed in seamlessly. So I hope you've enjoyed looking at hybrid identity here with ADFS and how that works in conjunction with Azure and Azure AD Connect, how you can have a little more control over how you authenticate to your environment, and then customizations that we can add in order to make your experience a little more custom for you. So if you haven't done so already, please do click on the subscribe button. It not only helps us out by letting YouTube know that you're interested in our content, but also it helps you out because now you're connected with the Azure Academy community. So please visit our community page. There's usually a poll or two out there, as well as leave us some comments below and let us know what questions you have or how we can help you further. And if this video was good, then please click on that thumbs up as well as the notification icon so you can get an email when our videos come out, which is roughly once a week. And thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next video. Happy learning.